Welcome to the deep dive. So if you've spent any time at all around secondary education, you have definitely seen it. That absolute brick wall of student writing resistance.
Hmm.
The student who just stares at the blinking cursor or, refuses to even pick up the pencil. Or maybe they turn in work that's so unclear it almost feels defensively unclear.
Right.
And the default setting for, decades has been to see this as a motivational issue.
A failure of effort.
A failure of effort, exactly. Or just, bad behavior. But what if that whole assumption is just wrong?
Right.
What if what we're calling defiance is actually a physical or a cognitive bottleneck?
And that's the thing. It's a painful result of these essential needs that were just ignored years and years ago.
That's the reframing we're jumping into today.
It is. That's
Yeah.
the whole mission of this deep dive. Our source is Dr. Jaime Hoerricks' Guide for Teachers. It's called When Writing Breaks Down. And we're really here to help you understand that difference between, behavior and a barrier.
Behavior versus a barrier. I like that.
The core idea is just so powerful. These writing struggles aren't behavior, they're bottlenecks. And we need to figure out how teachers can start to see the difference between structural, mechanical, and integrative problems.
I think that shift is everything. From calling it a moral failing to calling it a mechanical breakdown. And this guide is really aimed at that secondary teacher who often gets a student whose history has been, and this is a quote, thinned out by years of misinterpretation.
It's so true. By the time they get to high school, all those complex, nuanced struggles, things like, early articulation issues, motor skill difficulties, they've all been flattened, as she says, into that one old, weary label, behavior.
So our job today is to peel that label back.
Exactly, and see the infrastructure problem that's hiding underneath.
Okay, so let's start with what the source calls the narrative of blame. Because the way the system interprets these struggles, it has these huge lasting consequences for the student.
Oh, absolutely. It basically turns a lack of skill into a moral judgment.
That moral judgment is everywhere, isn't it? The text points out that when a student shows any reluctance, they're staring out the window, they shut down.
It's seen as defiance.
Right, and if they struggle to just physically form legible words or organize a sentence, it's treated like some kind of moral failure.
A moral failure.
Yeah.
That's such a striking term. It implies that being clear is just a choice they're refusing to make.
Exactly, that you're choosing opacity. It's another phrase from the guide. You are choosing to be unclear. But the data suggests they aren't choosing anything. They're just hitting a wall, a physical or cognitive wall they just can't get over.
And that wall, crucially, did not just pop up overnight. The source really drives home this unforgivable timeline of neglect. These are needs that were, quote, never mysterious, only ignored.
They were visible years ago.
Obvious, even when the child was much younger.
The examples she gives are just. They're really shocking. She talks about meeting 15-year-olds who've gone all the way to high school and never, not once, had a foundational evaluation, like from a speech-language pathologist.
Wow.
And yet their expressive language, how they get their ideas out, has been straining at the boundaries for a decade. Can you imagine a decade of that struggle?
And then you add the mechanical part on top of that. The guide mentions these 16-year-olds who are being punished, disciplined for handwriting they physically could not produce.
So the system is punishing the messy paper, not realizing the students' fine motor skills were never supported in the first place.
Exactly. It completely misses the point, which leaves us with the secondary teacher.
Who is, understandably, exhausted and exasperated. They get a student with, as the guide says, no context, no explanation, no record of what was missed.
All they see is the behavior. And the only tools they're given are to manage, contain, redirect.
It's a total crisis of context. You're giving behavioral tools for what is, at its root, a neurological or physiological problem.
You can manage the refusal all day long, but you can't fix the underlying cause without the right framework.
Okay, so given this whole timeline of neglect, the big question is, why does it all seem to just boil over when they hit high school?
And that brings us right to the bottleneck. That's the core of this deep dive. The guide is trying to help teachers see those three barriers we mentioned: structural, mechanical, and integrative.
Right, because the goal is to get these students the support they needed years ago. The SLP, OT, and classroom help.
Exactly, to finally get them that help.
So let's actually spend some time on these three types, because this seems like the most actionable part of the guide. We've said SLP, which is speech-language pathology, and OT, which is occupational therapy.
Right. Those are the two big ones we're trying to flag students for. Think of the three categories as like triage points.
Okay.
So the mechanical barrier is usually the easiest one to spot. This is the literal physical act of writing, getting words on the page.
Like handwriting speed or how they hold a pencil?
Precisely. Awkward pencil grip, slow typing, that sort of thing. If a teacher sees a mechanical barrier, that's a huge flag for OT involvement to check out their fine motor skills. It's a physical production issue.
Okay, so mechanical is the bridge from brain to paper. Then you have the structural barrier. That sounds a little more abstract. What does that look like?
A structural barrier is all about the architecture of language itself and executive function. So we're talking about syntax, how you sequence ideas, how you organize things.
So a student might have great words, but they can't build a paragraph.
Exactly. They struggle with transitions or sequencing a story or laying out an argument. When that construction of language falls apart, that's a structural barrier.
And if a teacher sees that, who are they flagging?
That points directly to an SLP evaluation, a speech-language pathologist. They don't just deal with, making sounds. They deal with expressive language, how we formulate complex ideas. If the architecture is shaky, the SLP is the expert who can help build it up.
Okay, that leaves the third one, the integrative barrier. That sounds like where everything collides.
It is. The integrative barrier is where the cognitive load just gets totally overwhelming because the student is trying to do too many things at once.
Oh.
So imagine you're trying to read a complex prompt, remember some sophisticated vocabulary, and worry about if your handwriting is even legible all at the same time.
The structural and mechanical demands just max out their capacity. They're spending so much mental energy on just holding the pencil and forming letters.
That there's zero capacity left for the actual hard part, which is building an argument.
And that explains why high school is the breaking point.
It is. We have this idea that adolescence is where you refine skills you learned way back in elementary school. You're supposed to be shifting your brain power away from the basics and toward, high-level analysis.
But for the students, Hoerricks talks about, and she specifically mentions autistic students, traumatized students, multiply marginalized students. For them, secondary school is where the long shadow of early unmet needs finally makes itself visible.
The complexity is the force multiplier. When the demand goes up, read this primary source and write a 5-paragraph essay in 50 minutes. Any weakness that was hidden before is suddenly exposed.
The skills they were supposed to be refining were never fully mastered in the first place.
Never. And that phrase, the long shadow, is just so perfect. It really shows how the past is creating the present struggle.
The source has another great image for this. It talks about how needs that were once low-hanging fruit
Yes. Easily fixed in early childhood, right? Maybe a bit of therapy.
have, through neglect, become tangled undergrowth.
It perfectly captures it. It's not a quick fix anymore. You ignore a small speech issue at age 6, and by 16, it's bloomed into this inability to express yourself in writing because the brain has spent a decade building workarounds for the original problem.
That small, manageable weed has become a dense, thorny thicket.
And the tragic result of all this is that the student shows up in high school as, quote, ghosts instead of histories.
Wow, ghosts instead of histories.
Their struggles aren't documented, or if they are, it's all written through the lens of behavior management. So the new teacher just sees the ghosts, the frustration, the refusal, not the actual history that caused it.
It's just a really damning picture of a systemic failure. These foundational deficits were missed, or maybe just dismissed, years ago.
And that struggle gets internalized by the student, and then it's reflected back at them as blame. The difficulties they have now have hardened into narratives that blame them for the system's own omissions.
So the system fails to see the bottleneck and then blames the student for the traffic jam.
That's it. It's a heartbreaking feedback loop.
Yeah, and it just completely undermines a student's sense of self.
The author really sums it all up. This entire sequence, the misinterpretation, the neglect, the blame, she describes it as the quiet violence of our educational pipeline.
Quiet violence. That's powerful.
Yeah.
It's not loud, it's not obvious, but it's systematically disenfranchises students. It limits their ability to communicate, to participate, to succeed, all because a structural problem was mistaken for a moral one. So this deep dive, it really gives us a crucial diagnostic tool. I think the biggest takeaway for you, for our listener, is that the next time you see a student writer who seems reluctant or frustrated, you have to look past the behavior.
You have to ask the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this defiance, or is this a structural, a mechanical, or an integrative plea for support, a plea for an SLP or an OT evaluation.
And the source material really forces us to accept that it's almost never willful defiance.
And when you accept that,
Yeah,
it opens up this much bigger, almost historical question, doesn't it?
it does. I mean, if we accept that a huge amount of academic struggle is really just bottled up unmet needs, these physical or cognitive barriers that were just ignored, then we have to look back.
We have to reevaluate history.
Totally.
Yeah.
How many historical figures, whose school records call them reluctant, defiant, unmotivated,
Non-compliant?
non-compliant, how many of them were actually just waiting for the right evaluation? They didn't lack motivation. They lacked the mechanical or structural support that would have let their ideas flow.
That's a profound shift in perspective. It means we have to completely rethink the role of motivation versus ability in academic performance. Maybe the biggest barrier wasn't a lack of will, but just a bottleneck waiting to be diagnosed.
Something to think about the next time you see someone hesitate before a complex task. You have to wonder, what's the history of that hesitation?
A huge thank you for going on this deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.